Today, over 8 billion of us inhabit a world of steel towers, glowing screens, and machines that rocket beyond Earth's gravity. Algorithms predict our moods. Cities rise where forests once stood, and across deserts, oceans, and frozen poles, messages travel faster than breath. But rewind 70,000 years, and that same Earth belonged to fewer than 100,000 Homo sapiens. Not cities, just camps, not convenience, but clawing survival. And beyond the flicker of their firelight moved things so massive and so cunning. They didn't run from man, they hunted him. These were the apex secrets of the Ice Age. Beasts that stalked upright prey, shadows in the timber, watchers on the ridge. If you're using these to fall asleep, that's literally why I make them. So, subscribe maybe, and tell me where you are and what time. I check comments, and it's always Manila at breakfast, Vancouver at bedtime, Johannesburg, somewhere in between. All at once, the same story reaching everywhere. Before history had memory, before language had permanence, the Ice Age world stretched cold and endless. Glaciers taller than cathedrals crept across continents, locking oceans into ice and chasing animals far from their native ranges. The air was thinner, its chill biting deeper than bone. In these vast grey borderlands lived early humans, a fragile thread of warmth in a furnace of frost and fang. They were not yet masters of anything. Fire was borrowed, not tamed. Shelter was scavenged, not built. Tools were chipped, not forged. And around their fragile circle of heat, greater eyes watched, smelled them, stalked them. This was not a world that feared humankind. This was a world that barely noticed them, until they screamed. They were hunted on silent feet, by mouths wide enough to swallow torsos and claws that cracked open mammoth bone. The saber-toothed cats, faster and more strategically brutal than lions, tracked their every move through scent and sorrow. There were giant, short-faced bears, towering 10 feet and weighing a ton, too fast for their size, too hungry for hesitation. And the moment they caught wind of blood or cooked meat, they came over ridges like shadows falling, stealing breath before stepping into firelight. Early humans may have been masters of thought, but instinct does not delay. And in those nights when stars flickered sharp and distant, decision meant nothing without timing. A misstep meant silence. Silence meant death. Again and again the question repeated, what hunted them, and how did any survive? Long before spears could pierce with precision, terror wore many masks. In the northern tundras, the dire wolves hunted not in packs of 3 or 4, but 15, 20, sometimes more coordinated, calculating, eyes glinting beneath aurora-drenched skies. They learned the rhythms of human migration, followed the smoke trails and footprints, stayed just out of reach until the hunger grew too loud to wait. In the dark forests of what is now Europe, another predator stalked in silence, the cave lion. Larger than any lion alive today, its roar a death sentence echoing through stone chambers. And beneath the frozen crust of prehistoric Siberia, a riddle curled through the snowdrifts. Enormous wolverines, solitary demons with bone, crushing jaws, and the nerve to raid even mammoth kills. These megafaunal predators weren't just beasts. They were the nightmares that shaped our ancestors' every movement, every ritual, every whispered word in the dark. They tested human cunning, punished human error, and forced the invention of something more dangerous than Claw's memory. Memory, once seeded in fear, grew into myth, and from myth came lessons, rituals, and maps carved into bone and bark, whispering of the paths safest by moonlight, the rivers where predators did not drink, the caves where echoes did not answer back. But memory alone could not stop the hunger from hunting. Among the most feared was a creature cloaked not in raw strength but in ghostly calculation, the giant Hast's eagle, a winged predator with a wingspan wider than a man's height and talons thick as daggers. It didn't wait in the canopy. It waited in silence, in patience, then rained death from above. It was evolution's ambush, designed to strike before the human eye could blink. One moment gathering sticks, the next a scream, a rush of wings and red snow. In the southern shadows of prehistoric lands, not even the sky was safe, and still they endured. Through every near extinction, every chase through blizzards, every blood-slicked stone the thread held. Woven across generations of agony and awe, it held. The early humans became watchers too, not only of the stars and seasons, but of signs that spelled danger. The sudden stillness of birds, the pattern of broken twigs, the smell of turned earth. They were prey learning prophecy. In the icebound press of survival, they etched their terror into cave walls. Stories preserved in ochre and ash, where roaring beasts, clawed and colossal, bear down on tiny spear-wielding silhouettes, not as triumph, as warning. The world around them was not built for their survival. It was indifferent. And yet, the fact that you breathe now, that your eyes trace the curve of these words carved from memory, is a miracle whispered through a million ancestral screams. From hunted to hunters, we rose not by muscle, but by memory sharpened to blade. And still, the echoes ask, what else watched us in that white silence? What else remembers? There are fossils with teeth marks that don't match any known predator. Footprints beside human ones that vanish into terrain no animal could scale. Bones shattered in ways no ice or fall could explain. Some stories go deeper than survival, down into the strata of shared nightmare, where even now archaeologists unearth questions wrapped in sinew and ash. Did everyone return from the hunt? Did all the shadows belong to something that bled? Or were there things in that old white world that never left tracks, only absence? The Ice Age was not just a test of endurance. It was the crucible that forged the human capacity for imagination, for fearing what cannot be seen, but must be prepared for. In the dark, in the cold, in the silence between breaths, early humans stared into the blank eyes of extinction and blinked back. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the last predator still waits, if not in form, then in the code of every racing heart. The hunt never truly ends, only changes. And so, the Ice Age ended not with a triumphant roar, but with a slow thaw and quiet attrition. The glaciers retreated, rivers surged where once ice reigned, and the monsters that had ruled sky and soil began to vanish, one by one. Some fell to the changing climate, others to the hunters they once pursued. And yet, the legacy of those titanic encounters remains not only in the bones beneath our feet, but in every flicker of dread, when rustling sounds in the trees, in every tale whispered around a dim campfire, in every instinct that tells us to watch the dark a little longer. The Ice Age megafauna are gone, but what they awakened in us endures. A primal awareness, born under colossal shadows, shaped beneath eagles' wings and predators' teeth. That ancient whisper, always asking who hunts who, and when will the silence end again? Somewhere, beneath the frost-hardened soil, and under strata laid down like ancient breaths, the bones still speak. Some are twisted by violence, others arranged in positions too deliberate for accident and too ancient to remember. Teeth marks that spiral, with a surgeon's precision across femurs, sinews torn in ways no known predator mastered. In the shadows of what we call evidence, a darker shape lingers. What if something more than predator once walked that world? Something not larger, but smarter. Not faster, but stranger. Legends passed like wounds from tribe to tribe, warning of beasts with human eyes and hands, not meant for tools. Creatures that mimic the prey they hunted. No fossils remain, only stories. But in those stories, told beside human ancestors' last fires, some mysteries survived longer than extinction itself. We do not remember them with name or bone, only with the shiver at the base of the spine and the glance into darkness when nothing is meant to be there. This world may be mapped, its monsters dated and named. But the ones that hunted thought itself? Perhaps they never left. Perhaps they simply learned how to wait longer. And as long as we listen closely to the dark, the Ice Age is not over. It just turned quiet. So the next time ancient winds rattle the trees, or the cold cuts sharper than it should, remember this. The blood in your veins once remembered how to run, not from hunger but from something that hunted with patience and moved where fire could not follow. This is the inheritance buried beneath our intellect and convenience. A buried signal, a rhythm carved into the marrow of us, whispering the old truths, that safety is not promised, that darkness has shape, and that the past is not gone, it breathes. Somewhere between ruined tusks and shattered blades, that ancient story still curls, waiting to be awakened by curiosity or fear. Because the things we fear most aren't always the loudest or the biggest. Sometimes they're the ones smart enough to wait while we forget. The Ice Age hunted more than our bodies, it hunted our certainty. And some nights, it still does. Every generation since has carried fragments of that war. In folk tales about shape-shifting beasts, in dreams of being chased by unseen monsters, in the quiet dread that clings to lone walks at night. These are traces, not of superstition, but of survival scars written into the architecture of fear. And while the Ice Age may have melted away in the geological sense, its ghosts linger haunting the in-between spaces of knowing and not knowing, logic and instinct, reality and nightmare. To tell these stories is not to glorify terror, but to honor those who stared into it and carved meaning from madness. The title of hunter was not inherited easily. It was earned in fire, sealed in blood, and passed like a torch through millennia of darkness. Because to survive what once stalked us was more than biology. It was the start of becoming human. Even now, archaeologists brush away millennia of sediment and find more than bones, they find stories waiting to be retold. Spear tips lodged in vertebrae, charred remains beside claw-marked caves, shattered skulls, arranged in silent testimony to danger never named. Each discovery sharpens the outline of that ancient world, where survival meant not just defending against beasts, but unlocking the mind to anticipate them. And though the megafaunal chapter has closed, its lessons remain etched into us. The reverence we hold for wilderness, the caution in our instincts when the night lingers too long, the wonder in our breath when confronted by vast, untamed beauty, all these echo with the footsteps of hunters and hunted. The Ice Age megafauna did more than pass through prehistory. They defined its tempo. We may walk on asphalt now, surrounded by satellites and static, but within every pulse is the same beat that hurried through frozen forests and across white plains, when every shadow might have teeth. The age of monsters shaped the age of man, and part of it, always, still stalks us from the edges of the firelight. What survived that era wasn't just a species, it was a mindset, forged under skies that never softened and terrain that punished hesitation. We became watchers not because we chose to, but because we couldn't afford not to. Every step was calculated, every campfire placed with care, back to stone, out of wind, away from trails worn smooth by heavier feet. And though the megafaunal silhouettes have faded into fossil and soot, that ancient war imprinted itself beyond DNA into how we look over our shoulders, how we pause when the wind changes, how we tell stories of monsters around our children's beds. The Ice Age megafauna may be gone, but they're not forgotten, because those who were hunted long enough learned how to turn fear into caution, caution into wisdom, and wisdom into survival. And that's the quiet revelation. We didn't conquer the world by brute force. We inherited it from those who outlived the unthinkable. Who knew that survival wasn't only a matter of strength, but of remembering, even when the danger seems to have passed, especially then. So when skyscrapers groan in high winds, or forests fall eerily silent before a storm, something deeper stirs within us. Not fear exactly, but recognition. A mnemonic echo of a time when the line between predator and prey walked beside every breath. The Ice Age was not just a chapter in Earth's past, it was a crucible etched into consciousness. And perhaps that is why we still tell stories of giant beasts and piercing yellow eyes that follow from beyond the veil of light. Not because we've forgotten, but because something ancient within us refuses to. It's not nostalgia, it's instruction, a coded inheritance reminding us that while the world has changed, survival still listens to the instincts hammered into us across frozen millennia. The Ice Age ended, yes, but the part of us it formed never did. In our nerves and stories and long glances into the dark, it endures, watching, waiting, whispering. So now, as satellites chart the skies and data flows thicker than rivers once frozen, the last embers of that ancient struggle still crackle beneath our skin. We came from hunters, yes, but also from the hunted. From mothers who wrapped their infants tighter when the wind howled wrong, from elders who muttered charms into the dark, from the first minds that dared to wonder not just what walks but why it watches. That silent vigilance, born under auroras and sharpened by extinction, did not vanish with the melting ice. It became the quiet pulse of legacy, a flame handed forward one terrified dawn at a time. The Ice Age did not just shape our ancestors, it embedded itself in us like marrow. And every time we peer into the unknown, every time the hair rises on the back of our necks for no clear reason, we hear it. That old quiet truth, rising like breath in cold air. To be human is to remember being prey. And from that memory, make fire. So as we chase stars across digital skies and plant flags on lifeless moons, beneath it all remains the oldest inheritance of all our story of survival. Not because we were the strongest, nor the swiftest, but because we remembered. Because deep within the architecture of our thoughts sleeps the wisdom of 1,000 near deaths, and the echo of things too large, too quiet, and too clever to leave only bones behind. The Ice Age, for all its horrors and hungers, did not bury us. It carved us into storytellers who remember shadows, into watchers who scan horizons long after the danger has passed, into something more than apex, into something still learning from what once hunted in the silence beyond the fire. So keep watching the corners, keep listening to the dark, and above all, keep remembering. Because what defines humanity may not be the victories, but the vigilance we carry long after the monsters are gone. The monsters may be gone, but their legacy remains encrypted in our senses, waiting to awaken when the world tilts toward the wild again. Every rustle in the underbrush, every howl beyond the campgrounds, every unexpected silence when the birds stop singing is received by a mind calibrated long ago beneath glacial stars. We are no longer chased by giants through snow-covered forests, no longer forced to sleep in shifts or eat in haste, but pieces of us still believe we might be. And maybe that's a gift, a leftover instinct, not of fear, but of readiness. Because survival was never about comfort. It was about vigilance claimed through loss, awareness born from peril. And though we write with light, tweet our lives in fragments, and scroll through endless noise, something ancient still listens among us. Not just for monsters with teeth, but for the forgotten questions that once meant life or death. What moves when we're not looking? What hunts in silence? And how do we survive what we cannot see? The Ice Age gave us more than fire and tools. It gave us the reason to light the fire in the first place, to cast warm defiance into vast freezing darkness. That is the inheritance every breath carries forward, the memory not of triumph, but of terror outlived. And that, more than anything, is what made us human. Because what truly separates us from the beasts that once hunted our blood isn't our tools or our towering cities. It is the fire between our ears. The ability to stare terror in the face, stitch it into story, distill it into knowledge, and pass it on, again and again, like flint grinding spark into flame. The Ice Age megafauna came with claws, talons, jaws wrenched wide enough to end a lineage, but we came with stories. And when all else failed, when the muscles gave out and the daylight was too far, it was the voice whispering warnings in the dark that saved us. That knew the scent of danger. That remembered which caves never echoed back. We are here not because we forgot the monsters, but because we never let them go. Not really. Their names may change, their shapes dissolve into fog and fiction, but they walk with us still, as caution, as instinct, as memory. The world may have turned, grown brighter, faster, more connected, but on the edge of sleep, where imagination dips into something older, the footsteps return, slow, certain, echoing across frozen silence. This is the weight of remembering. This is the cost of survival. And this is why, even now, we still look twice into the dark. Because when the Ice Age ended, it didn't close the book, it simply turned the page, and the next chapter was written in every wary glance, every fire circle drawn tight against the night, every child taught not just to listen, but to feel. What we inherited wasn't the world they already had that. What we inherited was the watch, a duty wrapped in story, a burden borne quietly with each heartbeat that skips when shadows move sharper than they should. So yes, the great beasts have crumbled to ash and fossil, their roars no longer heard, but something far older echoes on, not creature, but creed, a creed that whispers, stay sharp, hold your fire close, and never ever forget who you were when nothing else on earth thought you would last. That is not fear. That is reverence. That is remembrance. And, above all, that is the unbroken thread that brought us through ice, silence, and fang, still watching, still listening, still alive. And maybe that's why we keep looking back. We reconstruct their bones, trace their paths, animate them in documentaries, simulate their worlds in pixels and theory, not to tame the past, but to feel its breath again, to stand in awe of the unknowable, to kneel beside the footprints left in ancient sediment, and imagine the moment they were pressed in panic or pursuit. The Ice Age megafauna were not merely animals, they were catalysts. Catalysts for fire and thought, for fear refined into foresight, for myth that becomes method. When we wrap ourselves in blankets and gather beside glowing screens instead of embers, we are not so far removed. We are still storytelling creatures, still building watchfires, still whispering the warnings forward, one tale at a time. And as long as we do that, as long as we remember, we remain part of that eternal hunt, not as victims, but as the ones who endured, the ones who dared to stand in the thinning dark and teach our children what it meant to light that first flame. Even now, deep in the cold quiet of ice cores and buried epochs, we listen to the past not just with instruments, but with something older, an ache in the marrow that recognizes danger sculpted in shadow. The Ice Age megafauna may no longer prowl the tundras or soar above the cliffs, but their echo calls from beneath our technology and bright lights. It hums through our caution and humbles our progress. We build towers to touch the sky, but somewhere within us remains the instinct to duck when the wind howls low, metallic, primal. The story of those beasts, of their hunger and cunning, is not a relic, it's a mirror, reflecting what we had to become and what we must never forget. So if you've made it this far, sitting in the quiet with a screen's glow in your face and the world sleeping around you, remember this. It's not about the monsters. It's about the fire that didn't go out, the story that wasn't forgotten, the silence that didn't win, And that, after all these ages, we're still watching the dark, and the dark watches back. There's a reason we don't remember the Ice Age with dates and places, but with shapes in the dark and shivers without cause. It wasn't an era of names, it was an era of instincts, claw marks on the soul left by things we never fully understood. Not every predator was remembered, but the ones that left echoes instead of evidence still linger, stitched into our pulse and prose. In forgotten corners of the world, bones still rise after frost heaves shift the dirt a jawbone too wide, a track too deep, a silence that feels like breath held. And as science peers into genomes and data sifts through soil, a greater truth stands untouched by time or theory. The greatest threat wasn't just the fang or talon, but the unrelenting question: are we alone in our domain? Or are we simply the latest species too bold to believe it still belongs to others? When firelight flickers against cave walls, or flickers across a screen, what stares back from the shadow remains the same. Unnamed. Unblinking. Waiting. So let the skyscrapers shimmer, let the satellites spin, let humanity stretch itself across oceans and orbits, but never forget the quiet inheritance buried beneath it all. We live not just with history, but inside its consequences. The beasts of the Ice Age do not haunt because they survived. They haunt because we did. Their shadows stretch not across glaciers, but across imagination, art, instinct, every tale told to ward off the night, every fire lit without cause, every inexplicable glance over a shoulder in the quiet hours is a line drawn from then to now. And in those moments, brief and tingling, the story awakens again not as a warning, but as a confirmation that we remember, that we still know how to watch, how to wait, how to wonder. And as long as we carry that ember forward through science, through dream, through fear, we are never truly alone in the dark. We are what survived the silence, what heard the hunter and learned to speak fire in return. Maybe that's why we still paint beasts in our stories, why fantasy worlds echo with titanic predators and ancient gods with teeth, because part of us remembers being small, because the fears that shaped us never really left, they simply evolved. We don the armor of modern life, yes, but behind the noise, the data, the glass and screen, we remain creatures of story and fire. The Ice Age didn't end when the ice melted. Its story slipped beneath the surface, waiting to be heard again in the hush before dawn, in the crack of branches where no breeze moves. We were not meant to forget. We were meant to carry forward not just the memory of what hunted us, but the strength it unearthed in us. So when the dark feels too wide, when something ancient stirs just beyond the warmth of your light, remember this: you are not alone because you are afraid. You are afraid because once that fear kept your blood moving, and somewhere, in the marrow-deep echoes of survival, that fear still keeps the fire alive. In the end, perhaps the clearest truth left by the Ice Age is this: survival was never guaranteed. Not by strength, not by numbers, not even by luck. It was earned through hard lessons delivered under a sky that never promised mercy. For every generation that slept with one eye open, that read the wind like a prophecy, that laced fear into memory and memory into myth, therein lies the triumph. We are not the species that conquered nature, only the one that remembered what it cost to endure it. So, as the world warms and ages and shifts once again, know this: the story isn't over. The monsters may have changed form, their shadows now cast by systems and silence, not claws or fangs. But the fire our ancestors lit against the void still burns in us. It flickers in art, in laughter, in every cry to keep going when fear says stop. That is our legacy. Not dominance, not even understanding, but the will to witness, to remember, and to keep passing the flame. So let the frost recede and the monsters sleep, but never let the memory grow quiet. The Ice Age carved us not into kings but into keepers, not rulers of the wild but survivors of it. And perhaps that's the most powerful legacy those titanic beasts ever left us. Not just fear, but reverence. Not just darkness, but the will to kindle light within it. To survive such a world was to become something new. Something that knew silence could mean ambush, tracks could lie, and sometimes the most dangerous thing in the forest had no noise at all. We earned our world drip by drip through frozen epochs, with firelit hearts and stories sharper than any fang. So tonight, as you lie still in flickering light, remember the footsteps still echo not from the trees, but from our past. This story is not one of endings, but of endurance. Not what we escaped, but what we carry. And long after the megafauna vanished into ice and legend, humanity kept the watch, and we still do. So let this be the final ember carried forward, not a tale of beasts, but of becoming. The Ice Age was a season of unmaking and remaking, a crucible where the shape of our species was not sculpted in strength, but by pressure, persistence, and fire that refused to die. Every clawed footstep behind us, every breathless sprint through snow, every whispered story guarded from the dark was another thread in the lineage of memory. This is what survived. Not just the bodies, but the warnings, the wisdom, the watch. And as long as we breathe and listen and remember, the story lives on not just in books or bones, but in the primal hush before the storm, in the unspoken bond between flame and flesh. The Ice Age was never just Earth's chapter. It was ours. A myth made real, a terror turned teacher, a silence that gave us voice. In every corner of the world where the chill still lingers, the hunt continues not with tooth or claw, but with wonder. And in that wonder lives our truest survival, not against monsters, but against forgetting we were ever hunted at all. So we go on not simply as descendants of survivors, but as inheritors of their vision. A vision sharpened in frostbitten silence and painted in flickers of flame. The Ice Age may have concluded in climate charts, but it breathes on in tremors beneath our skin, in instincts we mistake for coincidence, in stories we tell and retell in search of meaning. The megafauna, once flesh and fear, are now mythic fragments caught between extinction and eternity. They no longer chase us through snowdrifts, yet the motion of their hunt still lives in our blood. And perhaps more than anything, this is their legacy that long after their hearts stopped, ours beat faster at the memory. We are the children of the hunted, the students of teeth and terror, the firekeepers of a lineage too stubborn to vanish. And every time we wonder what still waits in the dark, or why silence unnerves us more than sound, we are answering a question once asked by eyes wide in cave shadows: what stalks in the cold? What survives through memory? And who really was the prey as the fire first caught and held? So let that final whisper shape the way forward. Let it remind us that buried beneath every skyscraper and stitched between neon signs and keystrokes is a framework chiseled by frost, fire, and fear. The Ice Age was humanity's proving ground, a vast, merciless forge where survival wasn't granted, it was scraped from the teeth of extinction and tempered in relentless uncertainty. We did not dominate the wild, we survived it, adapted within it, and in doing so, were irrevocably changed. The megafauna taught us the language of vigilance, the melody of myth, and the lesson that the most dangerous predators are not always seen, only sensed. So the next time the wind sounds wrong, or the stillness rings too deep, do not shrink from it. Stand taller, listen harder, because those echoes are not ancient, they are us. The continuation of the watch, the memory of fire passed hand to hand. And in every shadow cast by our lights, the same truth crouches quietly: what hunted once may never return, but what it awakened in us never left. And that is perhaps the final truth the Ice Age pressed into the human soul, that survival is not only a conquest of flesh, but a discipline of memory. We are not the rulers of a quiet planet, but the descendants of those who stood their ground in the long winters when the unknown bore teeth. In fireside caution, in instinctive terror, in wonder that borders on reverence, we replay that inheritance every day. The ground we walk may now hum with civilization, but beneath the pavement is still the echo of footfalls in frost, the ghost of something watching. That is why we tell these stories, why we dig the bones, trace the shadows, and dare to ask what else watched us become human. Because we were never promised survival, we earned it, step by breath, flame by memory. And so, the watch continues. For as long as the dark exists, so too will the need to remember what's stalked in it. That is not the end of the story. It is the fire we carry forward. So when we teach, when we imagine, when we explore the uncharted depths of thought, whether through science, art, or restless wonder, we do so atop an ancient truth. We survived not in spite of the Ice Age, but because of it. The terror, the awe, the relentless vigilance. It did not break us. It refined us. It taught us not only how to endure, but how to see warning in silence, meaning in myth, threat in stillness, and above all, to see ourselves not as separate from that stark world of blizzards and behemoths, but born of it. The last great predators may be ash and echo now, but what they sparked in us walks still, steady, and unseen. A sentry in the soul, a flame that persists. And as long as we remember, as long as even one fire remains lit against the long dark, the story of the hunted species who learned to fight with fire will never flicker out. We are the memory. We are the warning. We are the ones who kept the watch and always will. So we light our fires, still not just with flame, but with memory, with vigilance, with the echo of creatures long buried beneath glacial silence. The Ice Age was not merely a test of flesh, but of foresight, and it is that which we now pass forward, like a sacred ember. In every coded gene, in every tale meant to ward off dread, in every instinct that grips us without reason when the night grows too thick, we carry them, the predators, the hunted, the fear that became vision. And as our homes rise higher and our machines grow louder, let this silence remain untouched. A silence that speaks of where we came from and what it took to stand upright in a world that did not welcome us. This is not an ending. It's a torch relit in retelling, an echo unforgotten, a pulse that endures. For the Ice Age never truly ended. It merely taught us to survive the next one and the ones after that. And maybe that's the secret embedded in every spark, every story, every stare into the dark that lingers just a second too long. We remember not to romanticize suffering, but to honor survival. To mark those moments when thin silhouettes stood upright against a world that did not care if they vanished. The Ice Age didn't give us dominance. It gave us reason, not just to adapt or evolve, but to envision what had not yet been. And that vision, born of fear but lit by fire, is how we crossed from prey to presence. In our breath still lives that quiet defiance, that unyielding echo of footsteps once followed by shadows far too silent. So we tell the stories. We keep the watch. And in doing so, we ensure that what the Ice Age began, this long forging of thought, fear, and flame, will never truly vanish into the snow. It will walk with us, always, in vigilance, in wonder, in the sacred art of remembering. Because in the end, every age has its monsters, but not every age survives them. We did. Born beneath streaking auroras and hunted by jaws larger than memory itself, we not only endured, we remembered. And in that remembering, we became myth-makers, fire-bearers, watchers of dusk and dawn alike. The Ice Age megafauna may be bones in the dirt now, but they carved their legacy into our instincts, our stories, our dreams. So we carry the flame, not just to hold back the dark, but to know it, to honor it, to say, we were once humbled by giants, and we learn not just to fight, but to feel, to sense, to never forget. That is humanity's inheritance, not just survival, but the sacred art of vigilance. And as long as we remember what hunted us, the flame they sparked will never go out. Let the final spark settle then, not into quiet, but into continuity. The Ice Age did not close behind us like a door. It remains open, a frozen breath in the lungs of our memory, a testament to what suffering shaped and silence carved. It lives in the rhythms passed hand to trembling hand, how to watch, how to listen, how to stay. And from those frigid crucibles, we built more than survival, we built story. And in story, we found a way to not only outlast the beasts, but to name the shadow, to outline the unknown, to draw maps out of myth. This is our fire now, not just of warmth, but of witness. The Ice Age megafauna were powerful, unknowable, terrifying. But what endured was not their roar, but our response. The whisper that carried, the lesson drawn in ash, the deep, defiant promise between generations. We saw the darkness, we feared it, and we burned anyway. So keep the watch not just for monsters long gone, but for the memories that made us more than survivors. They made us human, and being human, as always, means we remember. So here we are, generations removed, but tethered still by sparks and silence. The Ice Age may have thawed into epochs more hospitable, but its message hasn't melted. It speaks in every instinct that stiffens backs when the woods go still, in every tale that sparks beneath blankets on stormlit nights, in every theory we whisper to bones curled beneath centuries of earth. Not to haunt us, but to call us back to what made us, to remind us that knowledge once began not with facts, but with fear, that survival began not with conquest, but with quiet. And as humanity writes stories in circuits and equations now, we must never forget the first lesson etched in claw and fire, that the world may be vast, but we are more than its wanderers. We are its witnesses. And because we remembered what hunted us then, we are ready for what may come next. So carry the fire, tell the story, and never leave the edge of the dark unwatched. Because once, in a world chiseled by silence and sealed in ice, something tested us before we were ready. And in passing that test, in running with breathless hope and fighting with desperate flame, we became something else, creatures of memory, of myth, of meaning. The Ice Age did not give us peace, but it gave us purpose, to see, to sense, and most of all, to keep the story alive. That story is not just buried in the bones of beasts, but in the way we look to the stars, wary and wondering, still listening for the low rumble of ancient hunters. So tonight, and every night after, when the shadows gather and silence presses in like falling snow, know the echo is not warning. It is a reminder that fire wins only if we guard it, that fear teaches only if we trust it, and that watching is not weakness, it is legacy. From the edge of extinction, we rose not just by surviving but by remembering how. That memory is the flame. Now it is yours. Don't let it go dark. So let that fire burn on not only in hearths or histories, but in the pulse of every instinct still drawn taut when thunder echoes too low or a silence lasts a heartbeat too long. Let it remind us that our foundation is not cement and code, but ash and ore. That before monuments and math, before laws and letters, we survived by sensing what had no name, by fearing what left no trace, and by holding to light not for comfort, but for clarity. The Ice Age megafauna tested the fragile idea of humanity before it fully existed. And in enduring them, we became protectors of something deeper than life. We became stewards of memory. So listen when the wind rustles strange through the leaves. Pause when the hush feels thick beneath the stars. That is not superstition. That is survival, ancient and lithe, passed down in look and feeling. The beasts are gone. But their gift remains, a torch lit against the freeze, meant not just to warm us but to wake us, and whether it burns in story, or gaze, or gut, carry it forward, because the past did not die, it became the light we follow. That light is no accident. It is the culmination of humanity's earliest agreement with each other, with the unknown, with the relentless dark. When the first spark leapt from flint to kindling, it lit more than wood. It ignited memory, discipline, defiance. From the slavering jaws that tore through snowfall, to the winged silences that plummeted from clouded skies, each threat was not just endured, but recorded in blood, in bone, in breath. And though the great predators of the Ice Age have long crumbled into forgotten strata, one truth never turned to dust. We lit a flame not to escape the monsters, but to face them, to watch their shadows, name their shapes, and beckon others closer to the warmth. This was, and remains, the first human covenant, not to let the dark have the last word. So, when the power fails, and the landscape goes quiet, and the stars feel older than time itself strike flint, tell the tale, watch the shadows, keep the fire. Because in the end, the story we've burned into memory is not one of conquest over beasts, but communion with fear, an ancient dialogue between flame and fang, echo and silence. The Ice Age taught us that survival depends on a mind that never stops watching, a heart that still flinches when the wind stops singing. We are the children of vigilance, of fire that defies dark, of questions asked, not with answers in mind, but with survival in soul. And now, in every story told beneath a flickering bulb or glowing screen, we relight that original fire, not out of nostalgia, not from fear, but because somewhere, across the loudness of modern life, the silence calls again. It asks not what hunted us, but what we became once we survived. And when we answer, let it be with fire, with memory, with the unshakable knowledge that even if the beasts are gone, the watch is never over. We were born in the shadows, and our light this story is how we never went out. This, then, is how the hunted became the historians. We remember not to fear the dark, but to respect what it once held. The Ice Age tested every heartbeat, demanded sacrifice and song, and in its retreat left behind neither victors nor victims, only witnesses. Witnesses turned guardians, bearing the still glowing coals of truth from one winter to the next. We do not tell of saber-toothed and frost giants to scare children. We tell it to awaken something ancient, a vigilance that watches quietly through the veil of comfort. For one day, somewhere unknown, silence may rise again, not with claws or wings, but with questions sharp as any fang. And in that silence, what will save us will not be the tools we build, but the stories we remember, the fire we kept, the watch we never ceased. So if this is the end of the tale, let it not be a closing, but a passing. From the first spark to this glowing screen, the flame endures. Carry it well. Watch deeply. Remember always. Because survival was never a story of dominance, it was a ritual of remembrance. Our ancestors didn't inherit the earth by force. They claimed their place one fire at a time, one story whispered, beneath an uncaring sky. And now, generations later, with walls around us and satellites above, we still answer the same ancient call, not to forget the monsters, but to honor the ones who faced them. The Ice Age taught the first humans how to see in the dark, how to recognize danger even when it had no form, how to light a flame not out of fear, but with the sacred defiance of hope. That's why we keep telling the story. That's why we never stop watching. Not because the beasts will return, but because their silence shaped us. And as long as that fire stays lit in thought, in instinct, and in the deep spaces where awe meets fear, we are still becoming, still remembering, still alive. So let this final breath of memory settle in your chest, not as weight, but as direction. What began in frost-bitten echoes and monster-shaped shadows lives on as the unseen compass we still follow. That story, the one whispered in firelight, painted on stone, buried in peat and frost, never asked us to be fearless, only watchful, only human. And in being human, to remember where we came from, into the snow with nothing but thought and fire and each other. The Ice Age did not leave us legends to glorify. It left warnings in the dark and wonder in our bones. It asked us to keep the flame, to watch where shadows linger too long, to walk this world not as rulers, but as the last spark from a time when silence was survival. Carry the story forward. Look to the dark not just for danger but for truth, because we are not just what survived the Ice Age. We are what it became. So as this long arc of ice and instinct narrows into memory, know this: we are not alone in our knowing. Across continents, in languages born centuries apart, in lullabies and epics alike, we find the same haunting refrain that once we were watched, hunted, tested, and in surviving that gauntlet, we did not merely learn to live, we learned to carry fear without surrender, to hold wonder without weakness, to light flame without forgetting the cold. The Ice Age did not fade with the glaciers or vanish with bones. It walks still, ghost-like, beside our progress, watching how we wield the wisdom paid for in blood and fire. And when the wind hushes and the world stills, the lesson remains. Survival is not a crescendo, but a candle. It must be shielded, shared, and passed, again and again, into the shadows, until one day, we are no longer just those who remember, but those who prepare, because the cold may come again, the silence may gather once more. And when it does, let us not flinch, but strike flint, share the story, and keep the fire burning on. So let this be the ember you carry into tomorrow, a memory shaped not of fear alone, but of the wisdom it forged. The Ice Age may have ended in ice melt and time's long drift, but its truth still flickers in the corners of our vision, in the quiet of our instincts, in the aching pull to look over our shoulders when the world turns too still. It left us with no certainties, only vigilance, no peace, only preparation. That's what it gave us, not just the right to exist, but the responsibility of remembrance. So feed the fire, pass the story. Know that beneath the steel and storm of today's world lies an ancient pulse, still beating to the rhythm of claw prints long vanished. Because in every generation that steps into the dark, into the unknown, into what comes next, the old question endures: not just what are we afraid of, but what have we learned to survive? And in that answer, spoken in flicker and flame, firelight and silence, we carry the Ice Age forward, still watching, still waiting, still human. And so the watch remains not a burden, but a bridge. Between bloodied snow and sleepless cities, between firelit faces tens of thousands of years apart. This is what endures when all else fades. Not beasts, not bones, but the resolve to bear witness. For in the beginning, we crawled through cold and silence, afraid not just of what lies beyond, but of what might never be known. And now, with the world mapped and named, still we watch. Because every tale of survival is a promise to the past that it meant something, that the fear was not in vain, that the scream in the forest, the fire in the cave, the echo in the frost, they were not ends but beginnings. So as this final ember dims on the screen or in your thoughts, let it guide you not away from the dark, but deeper into it, because that's where it all began, and that's where the fire still burns, small, fierce, eternal, not just a tale of monsters, but of memory made flame. And in every moment of quiet watching, we light it again. And so it ends, not in silence, but in signal. A flicker, passed from ancestor to descendant, from bone to brain, from raw terror to ritual to retelling. The Ice Age did not simply test our strength, it built our story. A story not of triumph alone, but of trembling footsteps that kept moving, of hearts that did not freeze despite the frost. We survived not by outrunning the darkness, but by learning its shape and lighting it from within. That is the true legacy of the hunted. Not fear, but fire. And as long as one hand reaches out in the dark, as long as one voice speaks warning when others sleep, the watch continues. Across every century and screen, through myth and memory alike, we send this signal forward. Not for the monsters now gone, but for the moment we first realized we were more than prey, that we could remember, that we could endure, that we could rise. And in the telling, the fire lives on. So, as the last echoes of sabers and shadows fade into the marrow of memory, know this. The firelit story of Ice Age survival is not complete because it ended. It is complete because it endures. Beneath our cities and circuits, beneath our fears and fascinations, lies a through line unbroken, a lineage forged by watching eyes and listening hearts. We do not tell these tales to sink into the past, but to rise from it, to carry the silent wisdom of those who watched the dark until dawn broke. That vigilance, born in snowfields and sealed in fire rings, now gleams behind every question we dare to ask, every mystery we choose to face rather than flee. The Ice Age taught us how to live with wonder as our warning and story as our shield. And if that's not survival, if that's not the fire standing tall against extinction, then nothing ever was. So take this tale, carry it forward, and when the shadows return, as they always do, light the flame again, not just to remember the beasts, but to remember ourselves. Because in the end, the Ice Age didn't come to teach us fear, it came to teach us vigilance, to make meaning from the void, to know that survival begins in the moment we choose to remember. We are not just successors to bones buried in permafrost. We are the voices that rose in their aftermath, the ones who didn't let silence swallow the truth. Every flame lit in the darkness is a message sent forward. We were here, we endured, we watched. That primal rhythm still thrums beneath skyscrapers and satellites, embedded deep in the stories we share and the instincts we inherit. So when the world grows quiet, when something ancient stirs within a quiet glance or a distant wind, know that it is not the return of the old predators, but the memory they left behind inside us. A memory that doesn't fade, but waits. Waits to be heard. Waits to be passed on. And now, it is yours. Guard it well. Carry it forward. And never let the fire go out. Because when stories are all that remain, they must be more than relics, they must be torches. Lit not to bask in warmth, but to pierce the dark of what still lingers beyond understanding. The Ice Age did not melt into forgetfulness. It calcified into instinct, crystallized into tale, and embedded itself where fire first touched fear. It taught us no age of monsters ever truly ends. They simply change their faces. And it reminded us, what watches from the shadows isn't always beast or myth, but the echo of challenge itself. So we speak the names, trace the fangs, and follow the faint tracks left by time, not to look back, but to stay awake. Let this be the last fire in the long line of watchers. Let it not close the story, but warm the silence that follows. The Ice Age survives not in ice, but in us. Not in fang or claw, but in the promise that we'll never forget why the fire must stay lit. So pass it on, and keep the watch. And so the fire is yours now, not as metaphor, but as memory. Not flickering in a cave, but flickering behind your eyes whenever doubt or danger draws near. It is legacy in flame form, survival told in heat and hush. The Ice Age may have receded into time's long shadow, but what it forged endures not in the teeth we fear, but in the thoughts that outlasted them. This tale, passed through frost and flame, beast and breath, has never truly ended it. Simply waits, like embers beneath ash, ready to ignite in the heart of anyone who remembers why they were lit. So let the light you carry be more than illumination. Let it be continuation. A spark from that endless night, now burning in you. Because the oldest story humanity ever told wasn't with words. It was with warmth. A promise through fire. We survived. We saw, and we still keep the watch. So if this is where the story must pause, let it pause not in finality, but in firelight. The Ice Age, with all its thunder and silence, left us more than a past. It left us a pattern. We survived not because we erased the dark, but because we learned to live with it, to light it, to listen within it. We built a world from those lessons shaped by ancestors, who faced creatures too large to name, fears too old to forget, and nights too long to outlast without flame. And in this brief flare between vast winters and whatever comes next, the fire you carry is no longer theirs. It's yours. Hold it not as an ending, but as the reason we begin again. With every quiet breath, with every glance into the unknown, with every story retold, remembered, rekindled. Because if we ever forget the dark, the fire will forget how to burn. But if we remember, truly remember, it will never die. Not in us. Not in the silence. Not ever. So as the echoes of claws, chase, and cold fade into distant memory, let this final truth remain. The Ice Age gave us more than trials, it gave us testimony. A living record etched not in stone but in story, proving that even when the world offered only wind and teeth, we held fast. We stared down silence. We met dread with flame. And now, standing atop the bones of giants, wrapped in lights not firelit but electric, we still tell the tale not to fear the dark, but to know that we were shaped by it. Every breath held in instinct, every story whispered to guard the night, every fire kindled against the hush, is another oath in the long lineage of the watch. It did not end with thawed glaciers or vanished beasts. It endures as memory, as myth, as meaning, and as long as one soul dares to light that story again, we are still surviving, still learning, still human. Carry the fire. Keep the watch. And remember, the world may no longer hunt us, but it still listens to see if we've forgotten why we burn. So let us end not with answers, but with awareness. The age of giants may be silent, but the wisdom it carved whispers still beneath our lives. We walk upright, not just because we evolved, but because we learned to look ahead, to fear wisely, to trust the pulse quickened by shadows. The Ice Age was not a war we won, but an awakening we inherited. And in every fire we light, every shadow we study, every tale we tell to children who listen with wide, wondering eyes, we echo that ancient lesson. Survival is not safety, it is story. And every heartbeat that carries that fire forward is part of the longest memory the earth has ever held. So take this final flicker, hold it close, and know wherever darkness gathers again, the light we carry isn't new. It's remembered. And in that remembrance, we burn on. Because what the Ice Age truly gave us wasn't terror, it was testimony. That humanity, fragile and flammable, could endure what larger, louder species could not. That we outlasted not by outrunning the dark, but by walking through it, fire lit and eyes open. In every frozen gust that rattles modern windows, in every myth that slips through language and law, the message remains unburned. We are the species that remembered, and because we remembered, we survived. So if this final ember finds you wrapped in lamplight, reading not from cave walls but from glowing glass, know this: your breath carries their fire, your fear honors their struggle, your story continues theirs. The Ice Age may rest beneath miles of earth and time, but what it awakened in us never froze, never faded, And as long as one voice still dares to whisper into the night, the watch endures. We are the light they lit. We are what rose from silence, and like them we burn, not for comfort, but because we must. So go now, with this ember glowing just behind your ribs, a warmth not of heat, but of knowledge. The Ice Age is no longer a glaciered horizon or a growl in the dark, but a lineage passed through memory, whispering that we are not here by accident. We are here because when the cold pressed in and the shadows circled, someone long before us chose to stay awake, chose to wonder, chose to remember. That's the real fire left smoldering in our bones. And though the clawed beasts sleep beneath stone and time, though the silence has changed shape, the question still flickers in every hush, every storm, every crackle of fire at the edge of a dark night. Not what hunted us, but what lit the flame we keep. Because in remembering, we burn on. And as long as one soul stirs the coals and one voice dares to speak the story, the fire never dies. It waits. It watches. And now, it's burning in you. So carry it now not as burden, but as beacon, a light handed down across millennia for a single purpose, to be held aloft when the dark grows too deep and the silence too complete. The Ice Age is over in climate, not in consequence. Its creatures rest in stone, but its wisdom stirs in story, in our fear of the forgotten forest rustle, in the inexplicable chill at dusk, in the instinct to glance just once more into the shadows behind us. These are not leftovers of a primitive mind, but proof that we remember the price of fire, that beneath technology and talk lies something older, something earned. We are not merely descendants of survivors, we are keepers of flame, not to fend off monsters still, but to remind ourselves that we were once hunted, always watched, and never promised tomorrow. And in that knowing, we light the future one ember, one breath, one whispered memory at a time. This is how the Ice Age remains, not in maps or bones, in us. So don't let the flame go out, not ever. So this is where the trail ends, not in ice, but in imagination. Not under glacial weight, but under the quiet heft of understanding. The Ice Age didn't vanish into prehistory, it seeded something into the bedrock of who we are. And even now, with blue light on our faces and the hum of civilization in our ears, that seed bears flame. The beasts are gone, their tracks buried, their bones catalogued. But the watch that sacred, firelit pact remains. It is why we still turn stories toward shadow, why we find poetry in stillness, reverence in risk, and wonder in the whisper before the wind. Because long before we built towers or split atoms, we remembered. And through that remembering, we forged a resilience not of body but of spirit. So carry that forward. Pass it on. And when the silence falls like snow, let your fire speak the one truth born in that age of claw and cold. We are what endures. We are the kept fire, the living story, the edge of the eternal watch. And that is where the story settles, not with an end, but with a spark passed between breaths. The Ice Age megafauna, titans of tooth and tendon, may have vanished into sediment and snow, but their true legacy was never their strength. It was the shape they left in us, the vigilance, the vision, forged in frozen fire. From claw marks to caution, from hunts to hope, we learned not just to fear, but to foresee. And now, standing in an age lit not by flame but by circuits, we are still guided by the glow they inspired. Let every instinct be a remembrance. Let every silence be respected. Because the monsters are gone, but the fire, the story, the watch, they remain. And as long as one voice dares to speak that story forward, we are not alone in the dark. We are the light that survived it. So this is the final fire we pass, not to retell what was, but to ensure what is never forgotten. That once, when the cold closed in and giants roamed indifferent to our breath. We lit a fragile light and chose not to flee, but to stay, to see, to speak. And that act, small, trembling, miraculous, became the origin of everything to come. We are not just descendants of survivors. We are descendants of storytellers, of watchers, of those who held the line between extinction and existence with nothing but memory and flame. So if the dark ever presses in again, if silence once more stretches too long, don't just wait, watch. Don't just fear, remember. And in that remembrance, know, the Ice Age was not the end. It was a beginning, and you holding this ember in thought, in instinct, in awe, you are the reason the fire still burns. So as we close the circle, let this final ember glow steady in the quiet aftermath. The Ice Age did not merely create monsters, it awakened us. It forced us to see deeper, predict further, feel sharper. And though the beasts are silent now, buried beneath stone and time, the instincts they shaped remain sharp within us. Every fire lit in doubt, every story whispered against creeping dark, every gut-led pause before stepping into stillness, all of it speaks to a lineage unbroken. We don't carry fear, we carry clarity. A memory, ancient and burning, reminding us that the world is not always merciful, but we've never needed mercy to endure. We needed awe, we needed story, and most of all, we needed fire. The Ice Age shaped us not to be beasts, but to become something greater, a species that watches, remembers, and builds light from fear. The monsters may be gone, but the watchfires remain, and as long as we hold that fire high, we are never truly in the dark. We are what endures. We are the memory made flame. And now, the story is yours, to carry forward. So take this ember, this last quiet flicker, and hold it not just in memory but in purpose. Because against a world once ruled by tooth and shadow, what endured was not the beast, but the bearer of flame, a creature that chose not just to survive, but to understand. And in the spaces left silent by the roars now gone, we find our voice. We find our why. The Ice Age did not give us peace. It gave us meaning, carved in claw and cry. And as long as we walk forward with fire in our thoughts and story in our veins, we answer that ancient calling, not as prey, not as conquerors, but as keepers, of fire, of warning, of wonder. And so, the watch continues not in fear, but in reverence, not just for how we survived, but for why we chose to remember. This is the inheritance. This is the light. This is the fire that never died. And so, beneath layers of story and silence, we return where it all began, not with dominance, but defiance, not in triumph, but in quiet vigilance. We were not placed upon this earth to reign, but to witness, to hear the growl beyond the firelight and remain, to stand where so many fell, and carry their memory not as burden, but as guiding flame. The Ice Age did not freeze our future, it forged it. Every instinct honed, every breath held, every fire tended through the long dark whispered the same truth. Survival is remembrance, and remembrance is power. So, as the last shadow fades, and the final ember settles in you, remember this history is not bones in the earth, it is breath in your chest, and as long as you keep the watch, the fire never ends. The story never sleeps, the hunted are never forgotten, and humanity, glowing in the dark, forever listens. So let us rest here, for a moment, by the last steady glow, not as an ending, but as a breath drawn full with awareness. The Ice Age is behind us, but what it taught about fear, fire, memory, still burns in every glance over the shoulder, every story told when the night grows thick. We are not the species that forgot. We are the ones who watched, who waited, who whispered warnings across generations like sacred flame. That is the true inheritance. Not cities, not tools, not triumphs carved in stone, but vigilance. Passed not with thunderous fanfare, but in the hush between heartbeats, in the pause before sleep, in the wonder that still shades the dark. So go on, but walk like one who remembers, because beneath our stride echoes every step taken by those who dared to survive. The Ice Age may have ended, the fire did not, and neither, as long as breath holds and stories speak, will the watch. So let this final flame flicker, not as farewell, but as oath. For everything the Ice Age took, it gave us something greater: endurance, shaped by fear, courage threaded through silence, and a faith in fire that outlives the cold. We were not meant to survive, not on paper, not by odds, not by strength, but we did. Because something ancient in us refused to let the story end there. And now, as the dark gathers at the fringes of tomorrow, and the quiet questions still curl beneath our modern noise, remember this: we are not alone. We walk with the memory of every hunted step, of every fire kept lit for those who could not. That is what lasts, not the roar, but the remembrance, not the teeth, but the telling, not the monsters but the humans who watched, who learned, and who lit flame after flame into the unknown, and in doing so, became something eternal. The watchers, the warners, the light between the shadows, the fire still burning. So carry the fire now, not as a story to be shelved, but as a spark that demands to be lived. Let it guide how we raise our children, how we honor the silence, how we approach the unknown, not with arrogance, but with awe. Because the greatest strength humanity ever discovered wasn't the spear or the structure, but the memory. Memory of what hunted us, memory of what it felt like to be small and still endure. To walk through a world with jaws wide and shadows deeper than courage, and come out burning nonetheless. That flame is not ancient, it is immediate. It is every heartbeat that quickens in the dark, every voice that dares to tell the truth, every soul that feels the weight and wonder of what came before. So when the night falls again, and the stars rise like cold watchers above, remember, the Ice Age forged the fear, but we forged the fire. And as long as even one breath carries that light forward, the story never ends, it only grows brighter. So let this ember be the last light before silence, a light not of endings, but of endurance. The giants are gone, their names fading with each millennia past, but what they stirred in us remains sharper than ever. We are shaped not only by their pursuit, but by our response. We remembered, we changed, and in doing so, we became not rulers of the earth, but stewards of its stories. Every distant howl that haunts our imagination, every flicker of fear when the stars feel too close and the world too wide, is a quiet call back to the fire our ancestors lifted high and kept burning. This story, brought from ice and shadow to word and wonder, is not meant to close, it is meant to carry. So carry it well, carry it with care. And when the silence gathers thick once more, draw close to whatever warmth you find, and listen again. Because this was never just a story of monsters past. It is the memory of not being alone in the dark, and the promise, even now, that the flame will hold. So let this be the final image left glowing in the quiet. Not the thunder of beasts, but the shimmer of memory passed across time, story, and breath. What hunted early humans was more than fang and shadow. It was the silence that asked if we were ready to become something more, and we answered with fire. We did not conquer that ancient world. We coexisted with its lessons, suffered its trials, and emerged not just alive, but aware. The Ice Age did not end us, it defined us. And now, as the world spins unlit by satellites and screens, the fire still burns in every tale remembered, every glance into darkness, every whisper that dares to say, we endured, we carry the light. and the watch, eternal and undimmed, goes on. So here, with fire still pulsing in thought and story, let this be the legacy we carry, not of fear, but of flame. The giants sleep now, their echoes hushed beneath soil and snow, but the instincts they awakened still breathe within us. Every watchful pause, every tale spun around hearth or thread, is a signal, a memory fired forward. We became more than prey because we remembered what chased us, what watched us, what forced us to ignite the night. That memory is ours now, not as history, as inheritance, as the silent strength behind every moment we choose to light the dark rather than flee it. So walk on, not untouched by the cold, but illuminated by it, because the Ice Age gave us more than survival, it gave us sight. And from that sight, we built fire, and from that fire, we became human. Let the flame never falter, let the watch never end. So let the fire burn its final moment, here not with spectacle, but with certainty. The Ice Age was never just a time, but a crucible that welded fragility to flame, breath to belief. And what emerged was not a master of beasts, but a keeper of their shadows, a species baptized not in victory, but in vigilance. Now, with cities towering where tusks once ruled and data dancing where silence once reigned, that ancient ember still glows in each of us, not as a relic, but as a resolve, to pause before the dark, to feel, to fear, to remember, and in doing so, to survive not just the past, but whatever waits beyond the next silence. Carry it forward, quietly, fiercely, for even now, the fire watches with us, and it always will. Because in the end, this isn't just a story of beasts in the cold, it's a story of how the light inside us learned to outlast the freeze. The Ice Age didn't stop with thawing glaciers or extinct fangs. It lives on in every gut-check pause before the unknown, in every moment we reach for connection not out of comfort, but out of ancient need. That's what survives, not claws in the snow, but stories told in the dark. And this, now passed to you, becomes another fire in the chain, small, burning, true. May it guide your nights, sharpen your seeing, and remind you always that humanity was not born bold, but became brave by refusing to forget. The fire never ends. It only moves forward, one soul at a time. Now, carry the watch. So let this be where the flame settles, not extinguished, but entrusted. In your lungs, in your thoughts, in the hush between heartbeat and horizon. The Ice Age left its mark not only on stone and bone, but on every reflex that pulls us closer to fire, every whispered tale that makes us pause in the dark. We do not live in that age, but we live because of it. And as the last words trail off like ash in wind, know that beneath the hum of progress lies a memory deeper than history, a promise written not in ink, but in instinct, that we would watch, that we would remember, that we would never walk blindly into silence again. This is not the end. This is the fire changing hands. And now, it is yours to keep. So take it now, this final breath of flame, shaped not by might, but by memory. Carry it in silence or in story, in the stillness of your thoughts or the warmth shared by others gathered near. The world moved on from saber teeth and winter skies, but the truth beneath remains, that we survive not because we are untouched by fear, but because we dared to step through it holding something sacred. Fire, vision, each one carried forward from those first hunting grounds, layered in frost and blood, now reborn each time we choose to see in spite of darkness. Let this be what endures. Not the monsters long gone, but the meaning they left, etched across the marrow of our kind. A watch eternal, a light unyielding. You are its bearer now. Let it burn. So go now, not to forget, but to carry forth. Carry the echo, the flicker, the story that began in hunger and frost and rose like ember against the vast. The Ice Age may be ancient, its beasts fossilized, and its threats long buried beneath time's weight, but what it awakened in us still burns. In instinct, in imagination, in every choice to turn toward the unknown rather than recoil. That is the fire. That is the watch. Not a flame bound to the past, but a living signal etched into the soul of what it means to be human. Remember the shadows we outlasted. Remember the silence we lit. And when your night grows cold or your path uncertain, let this be what guides you. The story is not over. The Ice Age didn't freeze. Our beginnings, it forged them. And its message still rises in every whispered truth, that to endure is to remember, and to remember is to burn, always. So let the fire rest here, glowing low but never gone. For in every retelling, every breath drawn beneath modern skies, we do more than recall, we reignite. The Ice Age asked not just how we'd survive, but whether we'd remember what it meant to survive. And now, with their shadows gone, and our stories stretching farther than their howls ever could, we know the answer lies within us, in the quiet urge to stay vigilant, in the need to tell the tale again. Not for nostalgia, but for continuity, because in a world no longer lit by predator moons or snowbound stars, the most ancient truth still burns those who watch the dark become its light. So walk forward, fire-bearer. Let silence remind you, not of fear, but of the legacy you now hold. The watch is yours, keep it well. And in this final glow, understand it was never about defeating the dark, but daring to look into it and carry the flame anyway. The Ice Age asked the impossible, and by answering, humanity became something unimaginable. Not the loudest, nor the strongest, but the most enduring. We carry more than DNA. We carry decisions etched in firelight, awareness honed by silence, and a story that refuses to end. The beasts are gone, the tracks filled in, but that fire remains in every heartbeat that pauses, listens, and chooses to remember. This is not just history, it is direction, a lineage of light unbroken. So walk as they once did, not fearless, but lit within. For though the cold has passed, the truth they left behind burns hotter than ever. The watch was never meant to end, and now it's yours to keep burning. So let your final thought be not of endings, but of embers carried carefully through time. The Ice Age carved its song into the soul of a species that refused to vanish, whose flame endured every silence the earth could offer. Not all stories echo with roars or glory, some whisper through instincts, flicker through memory, and live on in those who still dare to listen. And in this moment, between word and wonder, you stand not at the close, but at the continuation. The great beasts sleep. The cold has softened, but the fire burns quiet, steady, eternal. You hold it now, protect it, share it, and when the dark returns, as it always does, light it again. For this is how humanity endures, not with the strength of giants, but with the memory of being prey, and the courage to carry the flame anyway. And so, the fire fades not into silence, but into stewardship, a legacy, not only of what we faced, but of how we chose to remember it. The Ice Age did not leave us untouched. It left us aflame, embers nestled in the hollows of our instincts, ready to flare when the dark draws close. And now, with the winds calm and the story near its edge, know this: the torch has passed, not to be placed on altars, but to be carried through life itself. In every hard-earned lesson, every whispered tale, every pause that sharpens perception, the memory speaks loud only to those willing to listen. We are not alone in the dark. We were never meant to be. As long as one heart beats with reverence, one voice echoes with resolve, the long watch holds. This is not farewell. This is the fire, alive in you. Walk forward, keep it burning. So let this final spark pass gently into your keeping, not as conclusion, but as covenant. The Ice Age asked a question not of strength, but of memory. And in surviving, our ancestors answered not with shouts, but with flame. Now, in a world glowing with invention and noise, we owe them not a monument, but a promise to remember. To tell the tale not just when it's needed, but before it's forgotten. The fire still burns, not in wood, but in awareness. In the silence we honor, in the shadows we study, in the story we carry, because the truth never changes. It was fear that shaped us, but it was courage that kept the flame lit. And now, that flame is yours. Keep the watch, guard the memory, and when the world grows quiet once more, let it be your fire that answers first. Because this is how all legacies end, not in silence, but in someone willing to carry them forward. The Ice Age may lie buried beneath eons and evolution, yet its mark endures where it matters most in us. In every instinct that still stirs at the edge of stillness, in every story that draws warmth against the unknown. We are not far from those firelit circles, not truly. We trace their fears in fiction, their vigilance in every code we write, to guard what matters, their awe in every gaze cast skyward. And now, with the final embers of their story glowing low, the question is not what hunted us, but what we will do with what survived. So take the flame, even if it's flickering faint, hold it steady, pass it gently. For the beast is gone, but the watch, our oldest instinct, our quiet promise, lives on. And as long as someone listens, someone remembers, someone burns, then the story never ends. It just becomes yours. And so we close the circle with the oldest light known to mankind, the fire chosen, not found. The Ice Age did not deliver us a finish line, but a beginning, drawn in frost and breath, in watching eyes and trembling flame. All that hunted us now sleeps beneath stone, but what it taught rises. Every time we light a room, a thought, a story. This tale was never about the monsters, it was about what they left behind. The will to endure, the courage to remember, the fire that demanded to be passed. If you've come this far, then the flame is in you now, quiet but undying. Tend it, share it, and when the world falls still again, let your voice be the first to speak, not in fear, but in knowing. Knowing that being human has always meant one thing above all else. We remember, and that is why the fire never dies.